Well, let's try this then. I'm gonna have to do a bit of practice because I am very not used to this. Not only, I'm finishing a ginger chew. Not only am I recording alone, so that means I have to try and make sure my volume is decent while I'm alone, which is strange because I know people can hear me. It's different. It's very different being alone while recording, especially with a camera in front of me. Hello, and welcome to this liminal space within Liminal Spaces. I'm your local old lady who lives at the end of the street, who you're pretty sure is a witch, but you're too afraid to ask, Adele. And if you haven't noticed already, it's just me today. This is going to be a bonus episode, because there's not a lot to do. I mean, there is a lot to do, but this is one of them. And so I decided to do a little bonus ep on my own. Nick might do some too, but the thing is, I have both the good mic and the not so good mic that we started out with because we would always record at my house, and this was before we knew that we wouldn't be able to record together for quite a while. We're gonna try and do something where we're on a call and we record our audio separately and then meld them for our new episodes when we run out of backlog. But even then, their audio is gonna have to be from their headphones or something, so that's gonna be interesting to say the least. I also am trying something new with video. Hello. So if you're on an audio only medium, you won't be able to tell this, but if you are watching this on YouTube, or if you are on a audio only and you want to see my face, go on over to our YouTube channel because hello. Nice to see you for the first proper time on this channel. Anyways, we've never done this before, and I know a lot of other podcasts who do this sort of thing with the camera and everything, and I always find it fun to watch those sometimes, especially with, it's usually more fun when there's more than one person. For example, I like to watch the Try Guys ones because they are a lot more fun to see their faces and what they're doing because they're comedians, and so I don't know if this will be just as good or as fun, but hello, nice to see you. I don't know. We'll see how I edit this too, because I haven't edited a video with separate audio in 6 years, because it's been that long since I've been out of high school, and that was the last time I took a media course. So we'll see how that goes. I think it'll be fun though. I've wanted to play with video editing again for a long time, so this is a bit of an excuse for that. We'll see how that goes, and we'll see if I actually do any actual video edits or if I'll just kind of plop it in there. This nose is because allergies. Runny nose and sneezing is not a symptom of corona. Do not get it confused. Anyways, so today I'm recording this on Easter Monday, and I don't know if it'll be out today, but it'll be out sometime this week, which means this past weekend was Easter weekend. And since this is that time of year, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about Easter's pagan origins, because if you don't know this by now, listening to pretty witchy-esque people, Easter was kind of appropriated from pagan beliefs initially. I mean, of course, there's the actual story of Easter and the Christian story of Easter, etc., which I will talk about, and I'm not trying to shit on people's holidays, because I believe in the good intentions behind it and the meaning behind it, but I still think history is important, and you should know kind of where your traditions come from and why you celebrate that way, as opposed to just having an Easter bunny and eggs, painted eggs, and not really know why. So I'm gonna start. I also have my notes on my phone, that's why I'm looking down sometimes. This is a lot less obvious when it's just audio, because obviously you can't see me doing that. I also got all fresh and dolled up for this because there's no other reason to. So why not have a little bit of fun? Especially like in my everyday, I don't normally do that much makeup, if any. So I thought it could be fun to get properly all dolled up for this. I hope you like it. I sure do. It's a lot of fun. So, first I'm going to kind of just talk about what Ostara or Esther is, and kind of the traditions and the meanings behind it and everything, and then I'm going to connect it to the whole Christianity deal of it. Disclaimer, first of all, I am not going to talk about Orthodox Easter or the Orthodox calendar because I know they are different. And I don't know how or why or what the deal with that is. So I don't know. I'm not going to talk about it because I don't know. I got all this info about what I'm going to talk about. Well, all of it except for a little bit. Most of it. Words. Most of it from all of these lovely, I don't know if you can see them. Yes. These witchy books behind it. That's not even all of my Wicca witch pagan books. Those are just the ones that I could find decent information about this holiday or this celebration within it. This is one of those kind of things that I've been interested in for years and years and years and just kind of never actually practiced on a regular basis. It's one of the many things that I have an approximate knowledge of. But I'm also going to try and use this time of inevitable, I don't know, currently non-discriminate, no, I don't know the word I'm looking for. Currently unending period of time, that's not the right word, but I'm going to go with it, of just time, because I have actually now finished my final exam for my last course of this term. I am taking a summer course, but now I have a month of nothing because I am now off work as well. So I'm gonna use that time as much as I can to do stuff when I can. Anyways, I have found I don't know about you guys, but I've been going in like couple days of like actually having energy and being really productive, and if I don't do things I'm gonna feel like I'm going crazy, and then like a couple days of absolutely zero energy, can't do anything, don't have the mental capacity or the physical energy to do absolutely anything, and then back up again. So like we'll see, it's fine. There's no quote unquote right way to go through something like this, so I'm just gonna kind of go with it and listen to my body and what it needs, and yeah. But anyways, for now, let's get into it. Ostara, or the Spring Equinox. So, Ostara, or Esther, is one of the Sabbats, or holy days in pagan beliefs. So this is like most pagan beliefs as well as, not most, this is like not only pagan beliefs, but also Wicca as well. So it kind of, there's like a, I don't think Wicca's definitely not like the only pagan belief, but many pagan beliefs systems, because I think they were all kind of very personal. I don't think there was like a very set way of doing things, but these were kind of, like there was no organized part of it. You all kind of just did what you wanted to do, but these were kind of the traditions that people would do for that holiday, for that holy day. In general, if you're looking at kind of the pagan wheel of the year, also PS, if I get any of this wrong, this is like, I'm sorry, this is just what I've gotten from my books and from my understanding of it and that kind of thing. In general, there is a wheel of the year made up of 8 Sabbats in pagan beliefs. It starts with Samhain, or Halloween as we know it, obviously on October 31st. And then there's the winter solstice, or Yule, on December 21st and 22nd. Imbolc, which is like in between winter solstice and spring equinox, on February 1st and 2nd. Then the Spring Equinox, or Ostara, on March 21st and 22nd. Beltane, in between solstices, on April 30th. The Summer Solstice, or Midsummer, on June 21st. This one I don't know how to say. It's in between Midsummer and Autumn Equinox. It's Lugnasad, I think. Either way, it's on July 31st, and then the Autumn Equinox on September 21st. Like I mentioned, Ostara itself takes place on March 21st, which is the actual spring equinox, and I'll get into why Easter changes every year, and it's not on an explicit day. There's other names for it. Like I mentioned Esther, which is another spelling / known name of the spring goddess, Ostara. It's also called the Rites of Spring, the Vernal Equinox, or in Wales they would call it Alban Eiler, and I hope I'm saying that right because we all know Wales has a lot of letters that you don't necessarily say. It's probably wrong then, but either way. Ostara, or Esther, is actually the Anglo-Saxon goddess of spring and fertility, not Celtic, which I actually thought it was Celtic because a lot of pagan stuff is Celtic, but it's not. It's the Anglo-Saxon version, or the Anglo-Saxon goddess. And I also mentioned that because the book that actually gave me this idea as well was this book of Celtic myths and legends, and so Ostara is not in it because it's Celtic. But I still found a lot of information in all of my other lovely Wiccan and pagan books. That's what I was going to say. There was also, this probably won't have as many tangents, but we'll probably still have tangents because even when I'm talking to myself, I go on tangents. But it probably won't get quite as derailed as it would get if Nick was here with me, as it usually does. So, the spring equinox is, as we know, kind of in general, is the when the first day of spring kind of thing, and it is the actual day, the first day since Yule, or the winter solstice, that the day and night are more or less equal in length. And so there's kind of the tension there between light and dark, as balance is kind of sought in the universe, and as winter is kind of making way for spring, and from this point on, days become longer than nights. And it can be seen as the dawn of the day, as well as like new light is emerging and covering the earth and giving new life, etc., etc. It's also considered a solar festival of fire, light, and fertility. It's the first signs of rebirth and renewal, which you can kind of infer from just knowing, spring as a season. So a couple kind of symbols and traditions that we all kind of, most of these, all kind of know, and why we celebrate using these things. So, for example, painted eggs. Why do we do eggs? It's connected with the goddess, both like kind of goddess in general in terms of Wicca speak, or Ostara herself, and it's a universal symbol of life, that's kind of straightforward. I also read that giving painted hard-boiled eggs as a gift can actually be traced as far back as Mesopotamian culture. And within Mesopotamian culture, they can also represent the birth of Ishtar, who I will come back to in a little bit later. And then witches would also then use these eggs and balance them on their ends to symbolize equilibrium, or the balance, like I mentioned, balance between light and dark of that day. Another one is hares and rabbits, and why those? Because they aren't exactly necessarily tied back to something you might know about initially. Like, I didn't know necessarily this beforehand either. They were actually sacred to Ostara, and they're symbols of spring and fertility as well, which I guess, like, thinking of now kind of makes sense. There's that saying of, Boinkin like bunnies and that whole thing. But especially hares, I've heard this, which was wild. Apparently hares are able to become pregnant with a second litter while still being pregnant with the first, which is bonkers. So that's also why we use hares and rabbits are a symbol. I also found on, there's another website I used, the only other website I used for this, called Ancient Origins, because they gave me a lot of information about the whole, like, about the origins of this and its connection to Christianity. And apparently in Germanic mythology, this is a quote, it is said that Ostara healed a wounded bird she found in the woods by changing it into a hare. And still partially a bird, the hare showed its gratitude to the goddess by laying eggs as a gift. Hence a bunny laying eggs. Mind blown. Never knew that, ever. And it's really cool to know that that's actually a thing of where this comes from. There's also, I saw a thing in more my more words, my witchy books, that this is also a good time to purchase a new birch broom or besom, and or making a ceremonial staff. And it's also the best time to bless seeds or grains before planting them. Or even, and not even just like literal plant seeds, but also metaphorical seeds and like plans. So like it's the best time to bless and plant the seeds of new ideas and new projects and new things that you want to do. Because as I mentioned, this is like very much the time of rebirth and renewal and new beginnings, etc., as one can infer from the kind of the seasons after winter, after the kind of death of everything's coming back to life and new ideas are sprouting, etc., etc. I also read in one of my books that sometimes people consider the year as like tides, similar to cycles. And if you look at those, it kind of mentioned that this spring equinox is the beginning of the growing tide. And just for knowledge's sake, summer is the reaping tide, autumn is the resting tide, and winter is the cleansing tide, which all makes sense to me. That sounded fake. I meant it. Like, summer is when you're reaping all the rewards of well, at the end of summer anyway. Like, it's between summer and the autumn equinox, and then autumn equinox you like harvest everything, and then between autumn and winter you're kind of resting, and then winter is like everything dies, everything's cleansing, and then spring is growing again. One of the books I found also talks about some classic pagan traditions, which were like genuinely celebrated in pagan tradition, which is pretty cool. There's one that it said baking a silver coin into sweetbread, and then it's shared by everyone celebrating they would have actual like gatherings of people of either the town or family, probably family, but you never know. If it's a small town, it might be like the whole town gets together. And then within that, the one who receives the coin is considered especially blessed in this time. They will choose a partner, and they would be called the spring couple, and they would lead the celebration with games and dance and singing. And then at the end of the celebration, the woman of the couple is given a gift of flowers, and both the spring lady and spring lord will go home with the favor of the god and the goddess, which I will admit, as someone who's not straight, and even if I was, we can all admit that heteronormativity is a thing. This is kind of a little heteronormative, but it's also like, if relating to the pagan beliefs of divine like masculine and divine feminine, or the god and the goddess is kind of like imbued within the whole thing, and it doesn't mean necessarily like divine feminine is only women and divine masculine is only men. It's kind of just like the balance of the two, of the two energies, etc., etc. So in that kind of sense, it makes sense as like a tradition slash like ritual kind of thing, because it's representing those two divine energies kind of thing. Side note too, if you don't know much about pagan beliefs, which I always kind of forget that sometimes the things that I know aren't common knowledge. Typically, the goddess is the moon, and the god is the earth, or the horn god, also known. I know that they also have actual names, and I cannot remember them, and I couldn't see them in any of my books. So, And then at this point in the year, both the goddess and the god are in their kind of young stages. The goddess is in her maiden aspect out of like, there's a maiden, mother, and crone, I think. And then the god is kind of just like a green youth, very young and bright and full of life, etc., as you can imagine, as spring comes along, as it wakes up and as its, new life is brought, etc. And their quote-unquote, their courtship dance begins. Another one of those traditions is cutting up the apple. It's cut across to expose the seeds, and the seeds are blessed and planted at the next full moon. I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. Bless me. Those seeds would then be like, blessed and bring ripe fruit and fresh fruit and abundance, etc. And then there's also just general blessing of plants, so people would bring young plants to these rites and ask the deities to bless them and bless their growth and all that good stuff. There's also a mention of, like, in classical, like, Roman Greek mythology, I can't remember which this is because I haven't actually studied that terribly closely, but it's essentially saying, like, how Persephone, who is, like, the goddess of flowers and death, I'm pretty sure, like, both, like, she spends half the year in the underworld and half the year with her mother, essentially, and that's why she's both. And so for winter, she's in the underworld, and then spring is when she returns back to her mother, and her mother is Demeter, the goddess of the earth. And so in anticipation of her daughter's return, this is when Demeter begins to tend to the earth again, and that kind of thing. And it's also said that the birds were the first to know of the goddess's return, and so heralding her with their songs, when it's spring when the birds start singing again, which is kind of sweet. Like, I like that idea of her mother being so excited so that she starts, like, tending to the earth again and everything's getting ready for her daughter's return. And that the birds are like, hey, come back, welcome. Anyways, so that's kind of all I have on Ostara itself. And as you can see, there are a lot of, I don't want to say parallels, because they're literally just the same traditions that we currently have in modern Easter to celebrate that. And so Easter itself, most of this info I got from that Ancient Origins website, and it's funny, when I told Nick that I was going to be doing this topic, they actually sent me the same source that I'd already had pulled up on my computer. So that's a good sign that we got the same result. Like I mentioned, it's from the website Ancient Origins. So Easter itself is a movable date, as I mentioned. It's fixed according to the first Sunday after the Spring Equinox full moon. So that's why it kind of moves around. It's dependent upon the full moon, which in and of itself kind of like hints at the original pagan roots, because the moon was obviously, and the moon cycles were very important to them. And then kind of, if you haven't guessed already, Easter itself is derived from Esther or Ostara. I've read that another Christianized name for this is Lady Day. I've never heard that before, but it makes sense. In Christianity, it is celebrated as the day Jesus was resurrected after his crucifixion and believed to be the beginning of Christianity, which is like kind of the general story, very glossed over. I did not grow up Christian, so I don't know much more detail than that. This is in terms of, like, if there was more detail than that, but I'm not sure you really need it in just knowing. You kind of just know the basic story. That's kind of what you need from this. It's not even specifically, in my understanding, it's not about the thing itself. It's more about the representation. So Jesus' crucifixion and the resurrection is symbolic of rebirth and renewal, hence why it's celebrated at this time in the year. Whether or not it actually occurred at this time of the year is another thing, and a whole other discussion that I'm not going to get into today. So there's also, it's really interesting too, because when in this article, and it kind of came with a video too, there's many stories paralleling this story of Jesus' resurrection, like almost to a T, which was kind of interesting, in terms of like, not necessarily what happened, but like the key points of this person died, they were gone for 3 days, and then they got resurrected, kind of thing. Which is, so the example that they gave was a Sumerian legend called the Descent of Inanna, tracing back to 2100 BC in like stone tablets that they found, which is wild. And this is where we get back to Ishtar. Ishtar was the wife of Tammuz. And this is another disclaimer here. I don't know any more details or context of who these people actually are in Sumerian culture or religion. I can kind of assume, but I don't actually know the details of that, so don't come for me for this. So I've got kind of a quote of how the website detailed this. So it says, "When Tammuz dies, Ishtar is grief-stricken and follows him to the underworld. In the underworld, she enters through 7 gates, and her worldly attire is removed. Naked and bowed low, she is judged, killed, and then hung on display. In her absence, the earth loses its fertility, crops cease to grow, and animals stop reproducing. Unless something is done, all life on Earth will end. After Inanna has been... Inanna, I don't know if that's supposed to be Ishtar, or... What? Hold on, sorry. I should have read this more closely. After Inanna has been missing for 3 days, her assistant goes to the other gods for help. I'm going to assume that's another name for Ishtar. Finally, one of them, Enki, creates 2 creatures who carry the plant of life and water of life down to the underworld, sprinkling them on Inanna and Damuzi. I'm also going to assume that Damuzi is another name for Tammuz. Resurrecting them and giving them the power to return to the earth as the light of the sun for 6 months. After the 6 months are up, Tammuz returns to the underworld of the dead, and remaining there for another 6 months, and Ishtar pursues him, prompting the water god to rescue them both. I'm assuming Enki is the water god. Thus were the cycles of winter, death, and spring life. And so that was one specific tale. Even if you think about it, Persephone's tale is fairly similar. I don't know about resurrection, but going underground and coming back after 6 months kind of thing. And then, but like you kind of look at that and the details are different, but essentially the idea of dying, being brought back to life 3 days later, and bringing life with you kind of thing. Like that, it just kind of, it's not the only story out there with these like kind of plot points, should I say. It's also interesting too, I don't know, this is kind of continuing on. I don't know a lot about Jewish traditions, but in doing this research, I realized and found out that Easter does have a connection to Passover as well, which makes sense. From my understanding, Passover has a similar kind of meaning of like rebirth and renewal, and also is kind of, it mentions the liberation of the Israelites from slavery, which makes a lot of sense. And so between that, I'm going to just read another quote because they worded things really well. This is from Ancient Origins again. Easter is associated with the Jewish festival of Passover through its symbolism and meaning, as well as its position in the calendar. Some early Christians chose to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus on the same date as Passover, which reflects Easter having entered Christianity during its earliest Jewish period. Evidence of a more developed Christian festival of Easter emerged around mid-2nd century. While there are distinct differences between the celebrations of Pesach and Easter, both festivals celebrate rebirth in Christianity through the resurrection of Jesus, and in Jewish tradition through the liberation of the Israelites from slavery. I also apologize if I pronounced Pesach wrong. I think it's close, but... Oh, excuse me. I hope I didn't offend anyone. So kind of from all of this info and kind of remembering that Passover is generally around the same time as well, I kind of put, I in my opinion anyways, this information kind of says that it seems that like Easter is kind of a combination of Christianity's Jewish origins as well as it's spreading throughout pagan Europe and kind of finding a middle ground there. And then having like Jesus' resurrection as the pinpoint of, or the pinnacle of the pyramid, if you will, pyramid of Easter, of Christianity's Easter anyways. And like I just, I mean, it's obvious that like Christianity has Jewish background, therefore has connections to that. But also, if you think about as Christianity spread throughout Europe, and Europe was all pagans, many of Christianity's holy days happen to coincide with those of pagan beliefs. If you don't know, like if you couldn't tell from when I was mentioning all of the important dates earlier, the Wheel of the Year, it's from what I understand, is because people converting to Christianity wanted to continue their celebrations with their same traditions at the same times of year. So Christianity kind of conformed and adapted in order to help persuade new converts, as well as to help persuade new converts to be like, hey, you don't really have to change your way of life, just, you know, believe that this was also Jesus, and believe all this stuff in Jesus, and God, and monotheism, and all that kind of thing. So, like, and to be fair, I don't know for sure, I wasn't there, but that's what I've heard many people say, many television programs and many books I've read have kind of given that explanation, and it to me makes a lot of sense, because like if you've got a new religion, a hot new religion, you gotta market that shit. And if you're like, you don't have to change your shit, just change what you call it, that seems pretty enticing. So like that makes a lot of sense. But anyways, it's just an interesting thing that I think is important to know. Like I mentioned, history is important to know, and knowing what you celebrate and why is important to know. So knowing like these traditions aren't necessarily from Christian background, it's important to know what they are from and why you celebrate it, and its connection to Christianity, and why they celebrate it now, and how it could possibly have like evolved to now be more closely associated with Christianity, and like what you can do to kind of make it your own. I'm a big believer in kind of understanding why you're celebrating something, if you haven't guessed that already. So like I think it's very important to know that stuff without drowning on too long about it and repeating myself too many millions of times. I kind of wanted to touch on, like I mentioned before, I wasn't raised Christian. I wasn't raised religious at all. So that's kind of why it's interesting for me to take a step back and like actually analyze this kind of thing, and Easter and holidays and religion in general. But because not only were we not religious, but we still celebrated all of the Christian holidays, and other than Lent, but I don't know if that counts as a holiday. Like all of the just like big actual like family get-togethers kind of thing. We celebrated these holidays with like absolutely zero connection to its religious meanings. Like there was no talk of Jesus, there was no resurrection, there was no like away in a manger type thing at Christmas, like all that kind of stuff. Even like there wasn't any talk of like paganism or like there was absolutely zero religious affiliation, which I know is like from my understanding extremely uncommon, unless I just don't know unless I just don't know those people, because most of my friends that I have spoken to about this did grow up as religious, as like celebrating at least certain ways, even if they weren't like strict, they still like, oh, Christmas is the birth of Jesus, Easter is when he rose from the dead, etc., etc. So it's interesting to me looking back and being like, oh, we didn't believe that, but we still wanted to celebrate and like get together with everyone and like have a reason to sit down with your family and have a big meal and, you know, have a good time. Yeah, I'm pretty thankful for the upbringing of not being particularly religious. It's definitely an interesting world to go into, because it wasn't even necessarily like anti-religious. We just kind of didn't, it wasn't a thing, which I find very interesting now as an adult and learning more about stuff. It kind of gives me a chance to look at religions and that kind of thing and kind of see them with a bit less, like, not much of a personal bias. But like religions themselves, I don't have a personal connection to them, so it's interesting to see them and look at them and analyze them. And then it also gives me the chance to like determine what my own beliefs are and what I believe in, and my own thing that I want to live by, my own values and beliefs and stuff about the universe, etc., etc. And yeah, I find religious fascinating, even though I do get a little fired up sometimes about things like organized religion, religious persecution, erasure of other religions during colonization, people using religion as an excuse to be discriminatory and hateful, quote unquote, in the name of God. Super not a fan of that. And I actually had to reword some stuff earlier that I think came across a little too aggro because of like Christianity's erasure of paganism in Europe. So I had to kind of dial that back a little bit because I can get pretty fired up about that. I also thought about doing a St. Patrick's Day episode a while ago, but I don't know if I can contain my frustrations with that one, because that one's a little bit more, a little spicier. Let's just say that. I also am this is kind of a side note, I'm also one of the things I get fired up about is like the erasure of indigenous religions and beliefs in North America. I know this doesn't have to do with Easter, but it's kind of under that same category. As a descendant of English immigrants to Canada, I feel a bit of a personal connection to that history, even though I personally had nothing to do with it, and I want to learn as much as I can about it. So if any of our listeners have any resources for indigenous traditions to learn about, or that kind of thing in general, just like learning more about indigenous beliefs and traditions, I would absolutely love to receive that and read that, or watch whatever medium it is in. So if you've got that, please send it to me at liminalspacespod@gmail.com. Anyways, on that note, like I mentioned a million times, history is important, and it's important to know what you're celebrating and why. And that's kind of it. Thanks so much for watching and or listening. Hello, I hope you enjoyed seeing my face. I know I was looking at my phone a lot. It's because I'm not good at speaking without knowing. Like, I've thought about this a lot, and I've written down notes, and I want to remember what I wanted to say. And I'm not good at speaking without remembering what I wanted to say and looking at it. Maybe someday I'll learn how to be a proper public speaker, but for now, I've got my phone and my notes. If you want to follow the podcast, we've got social medias. Our Twitter is Liminal Space Pod, no S after spaces. Our Instagram is Liminal Spaces Pod, and our email, like I said, is liminalspacespod@gmail.com. If you can send me those things, or if you want, tell us. Trying to think of something fun you can send. Nick is always better at coming up with those ones. Tell me what your favorite holiday tradition is, whether it be Christian or pagan or Jewish or Muslim or indigenous, whatever it is. Tell me what your favorite one is, because that would be a lot of fun to hear about, especially from ones that I might not necessarily know about. Our intro and outro music is Into the Woods by Purple Planet Music. And that's about it. I've been Adele, and thank you for joining me in this fun bonus quarantine experiment. And I'll see you next time in the Liminal Spaces. I've been trying to actively, like, take those precognitions out of my, no, take those, like, not precognition, take those, predetermined, no, what's the word? This is where I need a partner to tell me what word I'm thinking of. Preconceived notions.